Okay, so I can see that two people have managed to publish their badges on Badge Bloom. If you're looking at me like we had to publish a badge, then what you need to do, if you still got up in front of you, there's a button at the bottom of the screen that says Save and Share. If you press on, in fact, let me just share my screen while I can. So here we are. You press Save and Share at the bottom. It'll come up with, log in. I'm already logged in, so I can then download it, or I can press publish and it'll publish it on the little kind of gallery. I know for a fact, because I talk to Brian every week at least, I know that he's working on a private gallery. So if you log in, you'd be able to have kind of a private gallery of all of your badges that you're designing, kind of thing. He's looking for people to sponsor this, actually, if you know someone who's interested in doing that. So we've got ones from Katie, Kaylee, and Brian. So let's have a look at those quickly. Interesting. So this one is all about peer-to-peer mentoring. So you can see that it'll be issued by Student Life and Learning, a WIT. It'll be earned by student peer mentors. The reason that you'd have it is to recognize the completion of the role and display the skills that you've gained, like communication. What do you have to do? Well, you have to complete the criteria, which they're going to come up with. Who's going to assess it? Well, the coordinator of Student Life and Learning. And what happens next? Well, they can apply for a senior peer-to-peer mentor badge. Good stuff. So keeping it simple to begin with, and then you can add more detail later. Another one, got one which is just called badge, and it's issued by the Chartered Institute of Building, CIOB. It'll be earned by the chartered members to validate and promote the membership of the CIOB. What do you have to do? Well, you have to achieve membership of or chartered status of that particular organization. The membership committee would be the assessor, and next you can go on to fellowship. Good stuff. Let's have a look at some more. The STEM Reach badge. So here again, they've got the issuer and the earner. They know why they want to issue it, develop problem-solving skills, know what they have to do, a 6-week program. I wonder if you could break that down into smaller bits. The assessor is going to be the STEM Engagement Center, and the next bit is a sustained engagement in STEM programs. And again, for that one, I'd think about like tangible things. If you earn this badge, you can do this thing. This one's been renamed. I think that's just the one we had before. Good stuff. And then the last one we've got here is the FET Alumni Badge. So this is the School of Education and Lifelong Learning. It's anyone who's an active member of the alumni community, prove that they're engaged, being present at the sessions. The workshop organizer would assess it, and next they can actively engage and share good practice in the center and in the sector, and mentor other people as well. So the reason I like this is because it's a really quick and easy way that you can just design kind of with broad brushstrokes where you want to be. Now, what I would say with this is that what people tend to do is that they make their badge too conceptually big. Now, let me just explain what I mean there. Now, let's imagine that you're designing a badge pathway. That's what you want to get eventually. What people usually do is they design the kind of badge which would sit at the end of the pathway or somewhere like in the middle, like a big chunky badge. And what I would encourage you to do when you go back and do this for real, when you're issuing badges, think about what's the smallest viable badge, like the minimum viable badge. What's the smallest thing that you can issue which would get people onto the pathway? Is it that they've turned up for something? Is it that they've shown an interest in something? You saw earlier that we have been issuing as a co-op curious badge. So this is people who've shown an interest in developing a co-op, of being part of a co-op themselves. What can you do to get them onto that badge pathway? What can you do to get them to start the journey? So it's really tempting to look at the end of the journey, but what can you do to get them on it? And then what are the kind of the resting posts along the way? What can you do to create meta badges of lots of little things to stack up together? And the reason that you want to do that is because people drop out. People have dropped out of this workshop. People drop out of courses. Sometimes that's for bad reasons, but sometimes it's for good reason. Like they've got everything that they need. They don't need anything more from this workshop. They don't need anything more from this particular learning pathway. They've got the bit that they need. And so if you can package up that learning, that knowledge, that expertise in such a way that they can prove it, even though they didn't finish the pathway, if you can package up that learning, that's going to be of value to them, but it's also going to be of value to you, because you're going to know that actually 40% of people drop out, in inverted commas, when they get to here. It's a bit like the conversation about MOOCs. People talk about MOOCs having a 90% dropout rate. Well, they might do, but also, are people getting what they want from it and then just deciding that they don't need the thing at the end of it? So just be aware that you're designing not just a single badge here, but you're designing a pathway, an experience, a journey that people can go on. And so start off with something like this, and then think about what's above and below it. That might be useful. Okay, I'm going to pause there in case anyone's got any questions. I want to go on to next. I was going to do a bit of peer critique, but I'm looking at the time here, and I want to make sure I've got time for questions. So this is the kind of tool that you can use in your institution if you want to run some kind of workshop or whatever. We're going to do a bit of peer critique, but actually what you did in those breakout rooms was great. You decided to create a badge together rather than individually, and that was really useful. So I think you've already done that kind of discussion. I'm going to pause in case anyone's got any questions that they'd like to verbalize, or if you want to put them in the chat, that's okay as well. And then we're going to move on to the kind of next steps, what you do as a result of this workshop, the kind of the so what, the cash value of it. So I'm going to pause in case anyone wants to unmute, or if you want to put anything in the chat. Zero questions, right? Okay, I'm going to share my screen. So we're moving on now to the kind of next steps. We've been through an overview of badges. We've talked about how this might affect us. We've talked about different badge issuing platforms and designing your first badge. And what we're going to move on to now are kind of some next steps. I want to give you some advice after spending about a decade paying some attention to badges and digital credentials. I want to give you a heads up of an event which is coming up, which you might be interested in, and also to just give you a bunch of links for further reading on different areas as well. So let's start with some do's and don'ts. And again, you should have all of these slides in case you want to refer back to them. Number one, things to do. Number one, call them digital credentials or whatever works in your context. Like I said before, if you really want to call them micro-credential medallions, go for it. As long as they align with the Open Badges standard, it does not matter one bit. Secondly, add value to existing projects to help the recipients of the badges. Yeah, I think it's always better to add badges and digital credentials to things that already exist and to try and break things down a bit, rather than, as I'm going to talk about in a minute, creating a badging program. That doesn't, in my experience, work so well. Thirdly, again, I've touched on this, align with existing standards. If you've got standards in your institution, in the sector, or the standards that you can create, align with those so that these badges aren't kind of free floating. Like, align them with your existing quality procedures if they're lightweight enough. If not, use other ones. But talk to other people. Try and come up with things that you have a common language around badges. You've seen the Future Learn one. That was just them getting in touch with other people and having a bit of a chat. You can do that as well. I've heard that Irish people are quite good at it. Next bit, the don'ts. Don't just issue images. The metadata of badges is really important. That's what the Open Badges standard is all about. The reason that you have an issuing platform is that you do what's called baking. You're putting that metadata into the badge using a standard which then can't be taken out. You're not just issuing lots of pretty images because people can copy and paste those images and pretend that they've got them. When you've got the metadata, you can see that this badge was issued to CTEL rather than Ken, or for instance. Secondly, I've seen lots of organizations and especially institutions create like a badges program. And whilst that is well-intentioned, what tends to happen is that the program is all about the badges and whether we should use them. And what I would ask is, would you ever create a certificates program? Probably not. So you always have to have something which is the badge is about. Like the badge only makes sense if it's trying to credential something which is already happening, just like the certificate is only of value if the certificate means something. For example, Pizza Express, which is a restaurant in the UK, my daughter, when she was younger, was given a certificate for badly colouring in a picture which was given to her 5 minutes before her pizza arrived. Is that certificate of any value now that she's 10 years old? No. All right. We wouldn't have a certificates program which focus on stuff like that. What we're trying to do is to try and add value in existing situations using badges rather than creating a distinct badges program. Then thirdly, don't just focus on what works for you as the issuer. Like when you want to create a badge or a digital credential, you know the reason that you want to do that. You want to do it because you want to increase engagement. You want to make sure that people don't drop out at this part of the program. You want to validate this particular type of learning, whatever it is. But what you have to think about this in terms of like a product. Like, why would the earner care about this badge? What's the kind of cash value of it? What's the so what of this badge for them? What can they do that they couldn't before? What's the next step? So think about those things as well. The next thing I want to point out to you is that there's a couple of events every year. There's the Digital Credentials kind of Summit, which IMS Global have. That tends to be a mixture of technical presentations and also just what's happening in the sector. It does tend to be more focused on technical things, I would say. There's also the kind of Badge Summit, which Noah Giesel organizes. That's usually about between May and July every year. I haven't seen any details about that yet, but have a look at that. That tends to be more practitioner focused. I've keynoted that event before. I've gone along to it in person and online, usually a really valuable event. This is the next one that's happening though, the IMS Global Learning one. So have a look at that. Now, the co-op that I'm part of, which is We Are Open, we have a newsletter. It used to be called Badge News. It's now called the Learning Fractal. That's been going about 2.5 years. Some of the platforms which I've talked about here sponsor it. And over the last 2.5 years, we have shared a bunch of links every month. And what I've done for you is I've collated those links into what I'm going to call a library. And so there's general links. There's links about quality assessment. There's ones about your sector, formal and distance education. There's ones about professional development and business and just other stuff like issuing badges via Twitter and badges for COVID immunity and Erasmus Virtual Exchange and Microsoft Teams and technical stuff and all different kinds of reports and whatever. But I thought that that might be a useful place for you to start because it's a curated bunch of links of reports and articles and all kinds of stuff, which we have thought were good enough to share in our monthly newsletter. And I think it's just a good place for you to dip into and find out more about the kind of badges that and digital credentials that you might be interested in. So that's that bit there. So I have got some spare slides at the end here because there's some things which people usually ask about, which I'd be happy to talk about. But I'm going to pause there. There's a link there that Ken has asked me to put in from SurveyMonkey. That's kind of a bit where you say, you know, like, this was a great workshop, but he doesn't know how to use technology, all those kinds of things in there in terms of a satisfaction questionnaire at the end. But I think that this bit of the workshop, for me at least, is the most valuable. It's the bit after you've had a chance to find out about badges. It's a time when you've had a chance to have a play with what a badge might look like. You've had a chat with some of your peers and your colleagues. And now you've just got some questions, either that you want to ask or ones that you'd like to listen into that other people might ask. And I can go into stuff about blockchain. I can go into stuff about how you'd do this in your institution. I can go through other examples that I've seen. I can give you opinions on anything that you would like. So if you'd like me to go back to any slides that we've gone through so far, I can do that. But I want to give a good chunk of time for us to be able to go into Q&A.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Okay, so just in relation to cost, say, okay, so do institutions set up badges where they have the user pay to do the badge, basically? So I'm coming from a language background, so I'm thinking about provision of language across programs that can't actually fit languages into their program. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm just going to reflect back just to make sure I've got it. The first part of the question was about whether I've seen examples of people paying for badges, and the second one was about the second part of the question was about like badges outside of your immediate institutional context. Is that right? I might not have got the second part.
Not outside of the institutional context, but that say within a modular system where you have only enough space to include core modules, but a student might want to learn, for example, a language alongside their degree, and right. That's the kind of context I'm thinking of.
Right. Okay. So I do see there being a financial link between people earning badges and the badges themselves, but you stray into quite difficult territory when you start talking about selling badges or selling digital credentials. Because what you're actually selling is should be selling is the learning, right? The learning and the course that goes around that. Yeah. So what you can do, and this is what FutureLearn and other MOOC providers and stuff do, is they say, well, look, you can do this course for free, but if you want to make sure that you can show that you've done this course or like demonstrate your learning, well, then you can upgrade to this credential. Yeah. So you're not buying the credential as such, but what you are doing is you're buying the proof that you've done the thing. Yeah. Which is an interesting thing. So there's that way around where you do the learning for free and then you buy the proof. There's also just the traditional route of buying the course and at the end of it, you get a digital credential. Yeah. There's that kind of thing as well. I'd just be really careful about the language that you use to other people, because obviously there are people who make their living off selling fake PhDs and doing all that kind of stuff. And you don't want to stray into that area, if you see what I mean.
Thanks.
Feel free to put stuff in the chat or just unmute.
I was just going to ask you, Doug, to put in a link to the slides again in the chat, because anybody who joined the meeting late won't have that link. You don't see the stuff that's there from before, if that makes sense.
The link from the slides, yeah. So I've seen you put the Survey Monkey link in, but I'll put the link to the slides in. Yeah. Here we go.
Yeah. So hi, Doug. Just a question, maybe a bit more like a philosophical question or so. I mean, everyone here acknowledges the potential value that a badge or digital credential could bring. But why do you think that the uptake throughout the last, 10 years that badges are around now was so small, considering the potential impact?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So we're on over 43 million badges now, and probably by the time we're talking now, it's probably about 50 million badges, which, given the number of people in the world, etc., is still reasonably quite small. But what's really interesting to me is that it seems to be quite sector specific. So when you've got kind of places where knowledge is moving really quickly, sometimes people talk about the half-life of knowledge, right? So my background is philosophy and history and education. Things move a lot slower in those domains than they do in like tech, where I've spent a lot of my career as well, where you've got like blockchain and cryptocurrency and this and that, and people need to prove that they are up to speed with the latest technologies. So in those areas, you almost can't create regular credentials fast enough to be able to prove that you can do these things. So digital credentials are perfect for those areas. And that's why you see IBM issuing millions of badges, literally millions of badges. But to your point about the uptake, I think the uptake is on a bit of, one of those exponential curves where it's been really, really slow and then it's kind of going to take off. And I think that's for two reasons. Number one, the badge issuing providers themselves didn't have a very good user experience. It was confusing. Like, how do you get started earning a badge, issuing a badge? How does this work? Like, the mental model was quite confusing. I think they've done a lot better job now that they're kind of 10 years in, some of them. The second thing is, I think that higher education is quite resistant to digital credentials, and for good reason. because digital credentials disrupt the business model of higher education, because what they're saying is that, well, anyone can issue a badge for anything they want. And the value of a badge is in the eye of the person who's looking at it. So if I issue you a badge today and call it the Doug Belshaw PhD badge, and some people think that's really useful because you've been studying with me for a bit, and they think it's so useful that they're now not going to go and do their MBA, PhD, whatever at a regular higher education provider, well, that's a massive threat to higher education. The other thing is, higher education moves quite slowly. I've worked within a university before. I know how slow quality and assessment can be. I know how fast these things usually move. It can be glacial. So I would suggest that to help those things move faster, if you think the digital credentials are useful, is to find that point, find that department, find that real need for something which is going to credential things in a faster rate. So yeah, I think, Rolf, you're absolutely right that there's been times, and certainly in the past, where there's been a mismatch between what issuers want and what earners want. And I'm thinking back to 2013. 2013, you've got this big MacArthur-funded program in Chicago. And at the time, the biggest issuance of badges in badge history. And that was 10,000 badges for this summer program happening in Chicago. And there was much fanfare made about it. And all of these badges were issued to participants in this summer program, these young people. And of the 10,000 badges that were going to be issued, like a few hundred were claimed. And the reason for that was because the badges were designed to make sense to the people and the organizations that were issuing them, but they had no value to the people who were earning them. You couldn't do anything with them. They didn't unlock anything. You couldn't put them anywhere. Like, it made no difference to the people who were earning them, so no one claimed them. Whereas now I think people are realizing that in order to have a healthy digital credentials ecosystem, you have to have somewhere to show your badges. You have to have a next step for people. You have to be able to show them to someone for them to understand how that works. And the analogy that I usually use, just to finish off this bit, is I remember being 15, 16 years old in like 1996 and finding out about Bluetooth, this new communications technology, and being really excited because you'd be able to send things between different devices. This is before even people used Wi-Fi, for goodness sake. Some of you weren't even born at the time. And I was really excited about Bluetooth. I remember thinking this is going to be a game changer. But I remember it taking 10 years, until smartphones came along, before Bluetooth became a big deal, before it became a normal thing to do, to Bluetooth something between devices, but connecting your headphones to something or whatever. So it does take a while for awareness that even digital credentials are something that you can do for it to be viable. So lots of things have to come into place. That was a very long answer to quite a straightforward question. Sorry, Rolf.
Thank you.
If no one asks another question, I'm going to start talking about Trojan mice.
There's a couple of comments there in the chat. I don't know.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I missed those.
See them?
Is the conversation going on related to badges and their use for recognition? Is that recognition of prior learning, Ken? Is that what you're talking about there?
Yeah, that's correct, Doug.
Yeah. So a
few
years ago, about 6 years ago, did some work with the Scottish government, especially the SQA, the Scottish Qualifications Authority. Now in Scotland, they do a particularly good job. I don't know what the situation is like in Ireland, but in Scotland, they do a particularly good job around the recognition of prior learning. Like, they've got whole systems around that, etc. So they were feeding badges into that. Now I don't exactly know where that's gone. Joe Wilson, who was spearheading that at the Scottish government, has moved on to other things. I think he's in charge of a college in Scotland now. But yeah, I think that if you're recognizing learning that's already happened, that's a great thing to badge. That might be exactly the kind of thing that you want to do. When I was talking about Open Learn before from the Open University, that has provided such dividends for that institution. So they've got this mission to make learning accessible to as many people as possible. And Petrina Law and other people at the Open University have done this job with the badged open courses, and there's 65 of these courses so far. Now, I only touched on it in passing, but let me just go through in a little bit more detail. And it might have moved on since I've last spoken to the Open University, actually. So imagine the situation. You've got people who are potentially interested in doing a degree. People from the Open University, my dad's got an Open University degree, for example, sometimes they have kind of a mixed background in mixed academic background. Some of them have maybe already done some academic study, lots of them haven't. So the Open University often has to figure out, is this person going to be able to do this degree? How can we help them do it? If this person has already done a digital credential, a badged open course in a particular area, and they've managed to navigate that learning, they've done a good job, they've been able to show their evidence, that is a good qualified lead. That is someone who is going to be able to do a good job. And I have actually seen that the Open University have reduced fees. They've made an offer almost. They've reduced their fees because they know that this person's going to be a good bet for the course that they do. So you can use badges and digital credentials in marketing. You can use them to recognize the learning that people have already done, so they don't have to start off at their 101 foundation level. They can maybe skip on to other things. Sometimes that's going to be on a case-by-case basis, but sometimes it might be, well, if you can prove that you've already got this badge, or if you can prove that you've already got this experience, then we're going to issue you this badge. And that means that you skip on to the next bit there. So yeah, recognition of prior learning is a great framing for what we're doing here with digital credentials. Brian says, have you come across any higher education institutions who are using digital badges really well? Yeah, so there's some in the US who are doing a great job. I'm just going to share my screen again. Have a look at all the different badge providers and have a look at their case studies, because a lot of those are focused on the US. The reason they're focused on the US is because the US is a lot more commercial, and also there's been a lot of funding which has been US specific when it comes to badges as well. Where was it? This one here. So Arizona State, Virginia Tech, Georgia State University, those ones. I know the Purdue has been doing stuff as well. There's some organizations in Canada, BC Campus have been doing some interesting stuff. I've mentioned the Open University. I have been a bit disappointed in terms of the number of institutions in the UK who have been struggling really to dip their toe in the water of badges. And I think that's just because the last 10 years since the current administration has been in our current government has really seen a cutthroat situation in terms of fees in the UK. So I think that there's massive opportunities for universities to collaborate with one another and to do all those smaller bits and the kind of more soft skills and the people side of learning. But yeah, I think at the moment you'd be looking to organizations like the ones in Germany, like Birth, I can never say that properly. They do ones around like refugee badges and digital skills. So some German universities. There's ones in the Netherlands that do a particularly good job. America, Open University, and then there's some in Australia as well. So Deakin in Australia has been doing a good job there too. Wayne, do you want to unmute and tell us what you've been doing at GMIT? And also, Wayne has got a PhD literally in badges, so I should not be running this workshop. He should. Do you want to unmute?
Just before you go to Wayne, and you're most welcome, Wayne, but as you mentioned Deakin there, and you were talking about what they call badges, they call their badges hallmarks, so they're Deakin hallmarks, and they're kind of mapped to their graduate attributes and things like that, which is quite interesting.
Yeah. So once again, call them whatever you want, just align with the Open Badges standard. Wayne, are you willing to unmute, or am I going to?
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, Doug. It's nice to see you. Nice to hear your voice. Doug started me on my badge path, I suppose, back in 2015, really, when he gave a keynote in NUI Galway. So he's to blame for all of this, really. What we've been doing in GMIT since 2016 is developing a pilot study around badges to initially find out what different stakeholders thought about them, and perceptions have come up in the discussion today. And then how badges can be implemented. So the way to kind of engage people in badges, and also then to look at the impact of them on a civil engineering module. So we were able to find about 14 or 15 different value propositions for them, having spoken to students, staff, institute management, and a multinational employer. So all stakeholders were involved. Discovered about 7 different enablers to actually involve students and staff in incorporating badges into modules, so we know how it can be done. And then we know about the impact of them in terms of engagement and motivation. There was a clear and measurable statistical link found between the badges and a higher level of intrinsic motivation at the end of a year compared to the start of the year. So there was a longitudinal study involved as well. So the question was about doing them really well. Depends how you define really well. I think in GMIT, we know a way to do them really well, but there are policy, standardization, quality type issues that still have to be trashed out really. But we know what works in our context. So I think we've done them pretty successfully, but it all depends on how you define success, I suppose.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. I put a link to, there's a case study of the work that you've done on Open Badge Factory, because I know that you've been using them as a badge issuing platform, and also a link to your thesis there, which I'd forgotten actually that you did that through the Open University.
The badge issuing concept, that has to be an external thing. It's not an internal issuer, is it?
So you can actually do either. If I just go back to what I was talking about before with that kind of homely example of, dressmaking or whatever. So what I've been talking about, just for the sake of, ease of reference today, is your off the peg one. And I would suggest that, when you're doing your experimentation, just use an existing badge provider. But what I was talking about with these two, with the bespoke and the modular one, the history of badge issuing kind of goes from left to right. People starting off with bespoke ones, developing kind of plugins for existing systems, and then developing kind of software as a service ones. I would suggest that for your journey, if you're new to all of this, you'd go the opposite direction. So you'd start with an off-the-peg provider like Open Badge Factory or Badger, OpenBadges.me, or all of those different systems there, to make sure that this is something which is going to work for you. You don't have any technical issues, etc. Then look at all of the different ways in which you can plug into existing systems. So if I'm using Moodle as an example here, if you use Moodle, badges are built in. Great. You're hosting those yourself. There's plugins for WordPress. There's plugins for almost every single open source system or whatever system you're going to use internally, Canvas, whatever it is. And then if you find that you're such a special snowflake as an organization that you need some kind of bespoke work there, then use your in-house developers, use an organization that does some development work for you to get that bespoke work, to make sure that you have a really nice badge pathway or integrated badging system that's going to work for you. But I wouldn't start over here on the bespoke side, because there's no reason to add additional technical hurdles from the beginning, unless you've been given millions of euros by your senior management and they're like, we want this very specific thing to be done. In that case, knock yourself out. But I'd go from right to left if I was you.
Brilliant. I'm conscious, Doug, that you have a pressing appointment.
I do, but I'm desperate to talk about Trojan mice.
Okay, well, bring it on. Bring it on, right. Absolutely.
Right. I have often talked about open badges as being like a Trojan horse for your institution, right? Because when you know the history of the Trojan horse, right? So there was the siege of Troy, and the Greeks pretended to leave, left this huge wooden horse. The Trojans brought inside their gate. The Greeks jumped out because they were hiding inside, and they killed everyone, right? So the Trojan horse is a metaphor for bringing something into your institution which looks like one thing, but is actually something different. It's quite a violent metaphor, sorry. So the Trojan horse, with open badges, you're bringing something in which looks like just a digital credential, but actually what you're doing is you're bringing in something like iterative processes and collaborative decision-making and participation between departments and all of these other things. You're reviewing your processes about stuff. So badges is often a Trojan horse. The trouble is a Trojan horse is really big. And what you need instead, I think, and I did a presentation about this last year, are Trojan mice. Let me explain. If you try and bring badges in as like a big program, the chances are someone will not like it because they don't like the word badge or something else, and it'll never get through the stage gate and you'll not get the funding to do it. So instead, what you want to do is to develop Trojan mice, okay? Small little things that will get through little project stage gates, people can say yes to, etc. Now, this is not an original idea. I never have any original ideas. This is just something that I've stole from this particular blog post, which you can see at the bottom here. Trojan mice, not Trojan horses. And the particular thing which I find interesting is that when you do a Trojan horse, you pretend that it's a pilot, but then you roll it out across the whole organization. That's the idea. The trouble is that it's really easy to spot a Trojan horse. So someone goes, oh, I see what's happening here. I'm going to block that. So instead, what you do is you come up with Trojan mice. And there's different types of Trojan mice as identified that by this person. There's the obvious Trojan mice. Let's just try this. We think it's obviously going to work. There's the oblique Trojan mice. Let's try something from over here, which might not work, but let's just try it anyway. There's the naive Trojan mice. There's like the daft question Trojan mouse, where it's just like, what is it as simple as just making this tweak? Would that work? There's the conflict Trojan mice. So there's established good practice, and you just do the exact opposite from that, just to see if that would work as well. And then there's the failure Trojan mice. You do something which is designed to fail just so that you can learn from it. Now, if you do that, if you do those 5 different types of Trojan mice, the obvious, the oblique, the naive, the conflict, and the failure, you're setting off lots of different projects across the institution. And one of those will teach you something useful and new, and one of those will get some traction in some interesting ways. So for me, I would suggest, although it's a bit of a crazy thought to do, don't just think about doing one big badges program. Think about how you can set off these little Trojan mice around your institution, have conversations with people, think about what naive questions you can ask, think about challenging established practice, think about doing stuff which you think is obviously going to work, and just set off all these little Trojan mice from lots of different places in your institution. And what you'll find is that some of them won't work, some of them will, and you'll get to where you want to be eventually. That's all I wanted to say, Ken.
Brilliant. So that's Trojan mice. Maybe it's fitting that she's not on the call here, but my boss's first name is Helen, so maybe that's
Helen Troy. Yes, indeed.
That ties back into all of it. So look, all that remains for me is to, Doug, thank you very much for your time and your passion and your knowledge and sharing all of that with us. I really enjoyed the last couple of hours. They've absolutely flown by. The materials look brilliant. The references and links there, I'm sure, will be of huge benefit, not just to me, but to everyone who's on the session this afternoon. And I'd ask you all to give Doug a virtual round of applause. You can go to the reactions button at the bottom and put the clap sign on, or you can do it on screen. So yeah, it's been absolutely wonderful. Before you do go, I'll let Doug sneak out because I know he wants to have lunch before he gets onto the rest of his day. Doug's, I suppose, partner in crime maybe will be one expression. Brian Mathers is doing a workshop with us on February 26th that my colleague Hazel is organising. I'm going to put the link for that in here. So we're taking registrations for that again, and that promises to be a really interesting and good day as well. But before that, we have one other National Forum seminar that's coming up actually next week, next Monday. And it's on implementing internationalization at home for student success that our colleague Don O'Neill here in WIT is running. So either of those two upcoming events, hopefully you might like to join us again for those. The one next Monday, I think it's like about an hour and a half, and the one with Brian Matters, which I'm really, really looking forward to, is similar to today's format. So look, hopefully you enjoyed that. Thanks for joining us, albeit virtually, and it was wonderful to have you here today. Hopefully you got benefit out of it. Keep in touch and all the other good stuff, and it was wonderful to see you here. So thanks very much.